talk a little about e-collars, and I want to talk a little bit about that because a lot of people have a lot of people that don't know anything about e-collars have issues with them because they think for some reason it's something that shocks a dog because they call it a shock collar and things like that. So I just want to clarify to people that have an issue with e-collars and explain to you a little bit about e-collars, and just so people have an understanding. Number one is that if you're ever using an e-collar in a way where it shocks a dog or startles a dog, or scares a dog or jeopardizes a relationship with you and your dog, you're not using it the right way and you should never be using it. The whole idea with an e-collar is the fact that we want to find a way to interrupt the dog from doing some of the things they're doing, okay? When we talk about interrupting, there's a fine line, because I've always said this in my books, and that is, if you're using any type of collar, if your dog is rational, your corrections are going to be minimal, okay? If your dog is irrational, you're going to have massive corrections. And many times the corrections you're using are not going to work because the dog is in a state where the dog is just so reactive and it's just so crazy, nothing's going to work. The first thing we're going to want to do when we're correcting any dog is we want to make sure that the dog understands the collar that we're using. And it's a little different because when we're using my collar, my alternative training collar, or maybe martingale, or maybe a pinch collar or something like that somebody's using, if you're using a collar like that, there's a lot less variables involved. But when you're using an e-collar, there are a lot more variables involved. So we need to teach the dog how the collar works, okay? So when people introduce an e-collar, they're going to introduce it in a place where there are very, very little distractions, because they want to teach the dog what the e-collar is. And if you watch the people that are the best people that train with e-collars, the first thing that they do is when the dog just there's a little bit of a reaction where the dog is facing away from them and they can correct, and the dog's reaction literally is just kind of looks around a little bit and looks back at them. They'll mark it, they'll say yes or they're good, and then they'll reward the dog, okay? That's the idea, is because we almost want to make a game out of it, to where the dog just kind of feels the sensation, okay? I understand, I look back and I come in and I get a reward. That's the idea, okay? So if the trainers can do that in an area, or if we can do that in an area that is sterile, our backyard, or on a leash, on a long line, and be able to condition the dog to doing that, now the dog is going to start paying attention to that stimulation, that very, very low stimulation, okay? Once the dog understands that in that sterile area or backyard, now we can start taking the dog in the front yard where there are a little more distractions. So a level that you were using in the backyard or in the house is probably not going to work in the front yard where there are more distractions. Now we can go to a little bit higher level. The point is, though, just because you're going to a higher level doesn't mean you're going to get a bigger reaction from the dog. Because the dog is more focused on something else, and we're tapping just a little bit harder, he still feels the same thing because he's focused on something a little bit more than he was inside the house. But the art to using these collars is that we go to a little bit higher level, we tap, get that same response from the dog, have the dog come back to us and reward the dog. So once the dog starts to understand this collar, the cool thing is now you've laid a really, really good foundation. And now you can start teaching your dog to not bark, to not jump up on people, to come when called, to heel. Those are all things that we can do with the collar once the dog understands really how the collar works. So there are a lot of really, really good videos out there on Larry's YouTube channel. So I would definitely highly recommend that as well. And most importantly, if you are thinking of using an e-collar on your dog, highly recommend bringing in a trainer, have the trainer show you how the e-collar works, and then go from there.